In this part of the workshop, we are going to cover several cognitive, behavioral, and emotional tools. I'm going to share a variety of information with you for things to think about practicing later and throughout your life. These tools do take a lot of practice and patience, and my hope is to give you exposure to them so that you can find ways on your own to continue to practice them. And we're going to start with some tools related to thoughts. So one tool when it comes to thoughts is to be able to objectively observe your thoughts. So this is a challenging skill at times. And so if you imagine, if you take a minute to, there's different ways that people like to do this, but imagining thoughts and seeing your thoughts like leaves passing on a river. Or for some people, they like to see them on a conveyor belt passing by. And so taking a moment, even in this moment, to close your eyes and try to notice what are some of the things that you tell yourself, and noticing some of your thoughts, not trying to judge them, just that they are, and being able to be the observer of your thoughts. Maybe you notice thoughts about your to-do list, or your mind kind of goes to a variety of places. Included in thoughts, maybe you have images of things that kind of pop in your head, and you working on being the observer of those thoughts. Okay? And go ahead and bring your focus back to the room. So that's a pretty challenging skill, and to develop that, you might want to take a meditation class or mindfulness meditation. There are different ways to work on developing our ability to observe our thoughts. Another thing about thoughts is we want to be able to remember that thoughts aren't facts. We can have all sorts of thoughts. I might drive by a bank and think, oh, what would it be like to rob that bank? Doesn't mean I'm going to do it. Maybe 6 months ago I saw a movie where someone robbed a bank that looked just like that bank. And so that thought popped in my head. So we can have all sorts of thoughts pop in our head. I don't have control over who knocks at the door, but I do have control over how long I entertain them. So how much time I spend with that thought and really putting energy into that thought, I do have some control over that. But we can have all sorts of thoughts that pop in our head. I could think, oh, right now you're all judging me. And it may not be a fact. And so we can just have thoughts pop in our head all the time, and it's important to remember that they're not facts. Another thing about thoughts is we want to know how thoughts trigger feelings. So when it comes to situations, we often believe that the situation triggered the feeling that we have, when actually the situation, we interpret this situation, and that interpretation often triggers the feeling that we have. So an example of that would be, I go to the store and I give the lady my money, and she pushes the change at me. And I think to myself, what, does she think she's better than me? What's her problem? So that's the interpretation of her pushing the change at me. What feeling might I feel from that interpretation?
Maybe irritation or, I don't know, anger.
Yeah, so I might feel irritated or angry. So if I give the lady my money and she pushes the change at me, the exact same event, the exact same way, and I think to myself, wow, it's probably late in her shift, she's probably tired. What feeling might I feel?
Sympathy.
Yeah, so I might have sympathy. I might think, oh boy, I'm glad I don't have her job. And I might even smile at her. And so the event didn't change. It's the interpretation of the event that changes. So part of it is noticing what our interpretations are and that they do trigger our feelings. Now, it isn't that all our feelings are in our head. If I give the lady the money and she slaps me and I get angry, I didn't imagine that, right? Lots of times life has painful moments. But sometimes it is really our interpretation that is turning up the heat on that pain. and kind of looking at how our interpretations trigger feelings. So one way to practice this skill is being able to observe your feeling and then ask yourself, what did I tell myself about that situation? What is the interpretation in the middle that's triggering this feeling? Another skill is the skill of being able to shift perspectives. So when I think about shifting perspectives, how interpretations trigger feelings, even shifting a little thing like a word. If I say to myself, I have to work, I have to study, I have to go to class, I might feel a little trapped. But if I say, I choose to go to work because I like to have a roof over my head and food in the fridge, I choose to study because I like to get good grades, I choose to go to class because I might learn something, that's going to have a different impact on how we feel. And so being able to shift perspectives a little bit. When I think about shifting perspectives, I think of the old story of the blind man and the elephant. So there's a very old story of several blind men describing an elephant. And one is at the side of the elephant going, an elephant is like a wall. That's what an elephant's like. And another is at the leg going, no, an elephant's like a tree. That's what an elephant's like. And another one's at the tail going, an elephant is like a twig. That's what an elephant's like. And another is at the nose going, an elephant's like a snake. That's what an elephant's like. And they're all arguing and arguing. And in some ways they're right, but when it comes to what an elephant is truly like, they're all wrong because they're limited in their perspective. And so thinking about that sometimes, that we all come to a situation with a certain perspective, certain life experience that maybe is limited. And so the skill of being able to shift perspectives, work ourselves around that elephant. Right now I'm telling myself this about this situation. What's 5 other ways that I can look at it? So that's a way to practice it. Asking yourself, what are some other ways that I can look at this? Now, in part 1, we talked about interpersonal stress being a stressor, stress between relationships. Well, that's also, when I work with couples sometimes couples get stuck in their perspective. So one is like at the side going, it's a wall, and the other one's, it's a leg, yeah, it's a tree, and they sit there really stuck in their perspectives, trying to convince each other of their perspective and not taking the time to be curious about the other person's perspective. You're saying it feels like a tree? Okay, tell me more about that. What's that like for you? And so trying to put ourselves in other people's shoes and communicating. But when we get too stuck in trying to justify our perspective, we miss out on learning from other people and putting ourselves in other people's shoes and getting the big picture. So thinking about that sometimes. Another skill, this is exposure to some pretty challenging skills to master, but being able to be aware of and shift negative, critical, emotionally abusive self-talk. So most of us in this society, if we talk to our friends the way that we talk to ourselves, we wouldn't have any friends. So being aware of our self-talk and the impact that that has, because that's part of our perspective and the emotions that get triggered. And so noticing some of those things. When we have a thought, in a way, it's like digging a groove in our brain. So the neurons fire and the myelin sheath gets thicker every time we have a certain thought. So if somebody whispers your name, you really catch on to it because you've had the thought of your name a lot because you've heard it a lot. And so part of it is noticing if we have certain thoughts that aren't so helpful for us, and then working on breaking that a little bit. So an example would be, I have dyslexia, and growing up, I was often teased and called stupid by my classmates. And so I started telling myself that. So having the thought, I'm stupid, was really strong in my brain. And some therapists recommend using affirmations, so saying maybe the opposite. So noticing every time I said I'm stupid, saying I'm smart, I'm smart, I'm smart. Now, it isn't that I think I'm stupid or that I'm totally brilliant, but by doing that, it helps develop other connections in the brain so that you have more cognitive flexibility. So when you notice that you have certain things that you tell yourself, negative things you tell yourself out of habit, saying the opposite, even if you don't believe it, sometimes can help you get there, to have more diversity in how you think. So that's one way to practice that. Another thing about being aware of negative, critical, emotionally abusive self-talk, sometimes it's helpful to know where that's coming from. You don't always have to know. You can work on changing it without knowing. But being able to label some things, like maybe you've had someone in your past that was really critical or negative, oh, that's Aunt June. There she goes again, giving me a lecture. And noticing when you're the one playing those tapes. And maybe just labeling it. Nope, June, you don't get to go with me to this class. I'm not taking you on this date. Whatever that is, being able to notice it and try to substitute different types of thinking. Or maybe just ignore her. Notice those negative thoughts and focus on something else. Not put energy into it, but let it pass by putting energy into other ways of thinking. And another skill is noticing where your mind goes, okay? If you think about life on a timeline, usually this moment's not so bad. Sometimes this moment can be pretty painful, but usually it's not so bad. What happens is that our attention leaves this moment quite a bit. I mean, even in the last 5 minutes, most likely you have left the room mentally a few times. Maybe you've gone to the past, or maybe you've gone to the future, maybe you've gone to your to-do list. And so bringing yourself back, the skill of bringing yourself back to this present moment. If I have a habit of going to the future and in this moment practicing anxiety, maybe I go to the future and I worry about an upcoming event. In this moment, I'm just practicing being anxious. So if I can catch myself from doing that and bring my focus back to this moment. Sometimes people go to the past, and in this moment, they practice feeling remorse or shame. And they're just practicing feeling those painful feelings. So being able to notice and bring ourselves back. Now, sometimes it is helpful to mentally go to the future if you are planning. If I'm thinking about something and I'm planning for it, what am I going to do and how am I going to do it? And maybe I'm even practicing a little confidence. That's helpful. But if I'm just practicing worrying, that's usually not very helpful. The same thing with the past. Sometimes it's helpful to go in the past and say, okay, what did I learn from this situation so I don't do that again? This reminds me of that. What do I need to do different this time? So if we're going to the past and we're learning, then sometimes that's helpful. But if we're just sitting there practicing painful emotions, that's just usually not very helpful. Okay? So it takes a lot of practice and patience, though, to bring yourself back to this moment, just gently over and over again. And another skill, being effective in the moment. Part of being effective in the moment, so making the most effective choices given the situation, is that we have to accept reality. So that is challenging. In our society, we often take a situation and wish that it was different. For example, if I accept this is how the teacher teaches, what do I need to do well in this class? I might be able to come up with some ideas on how to effectively pass the class. If I get wrapped up in, well, he should teach this way, and what if he taught this way, and I should have took this class 3 years ago, and we get distracted and we try to make choices based on fantasy, the what ifs and the shoulds, we're not going to make effective choices. We're just wasting energy coming up with solutions to fantasy. Now, acceptance of reality does not mean that you have to approve of it. I don't have to convince myself I like the way the teacher teaches. I just have to accept this is reality and what are my options. I accept I don't like the way he teaches. And what are my options? This is how I can pass the class. Maybe I can drop the class and take it from a different teacher. But unless I first accept reality, I can't make effective choices. So noticing if you use shoulds and what ifs, bring yourself back. Realize you're going on a tangent. So what if this happens? I should have done that. and try to bring yourself back to reality to make effective choices. So as you can see, all of these skills are pretty challenging and they take some practice and patience, but they do help a lot with emotion regulation and stress management. So let's go a little bit to feelings. So I just used the word emotion regulation. So emotion regulation is our ability to use our emotions as a resource instead of being controlled by our emotions like a puppet on a string, right? So increasing our ability to use our emotions. So that's a skill that we can develop that takes practice. One of the things with that is being able to notice them, notice our emotions without making them larger than they need to be or pushing them away. Sometimes people are in the habit of making them larger than they need to be so then they can finally notice them. But noticing them at a manageable level. If our emotions are too intense, then it affects sometimes the way we perceive things, maybe what we say, what we hear. And so having them at a manageable level, noticing. But don't automatically just push them away. Okay. Knowing that emotions are information. So here's this emotion, it's information and not fact. And I have a few examples of that. So thinking about fear. Fear is a signal that maybe I'm in danger. Now, are you in danger every time you're afraid? No. So it's a signal that maybe I'm in danger, but it's not a fact. So we want to notice it, say, oh, I'm feeling afraid. Am I in danger? No, I'm not. Okay. Guilt is a signal that maybe I've made a mistake. It lets us know that maybe I've done something that is not consistent with the person I want to be. But just because I feel guilty does not mean that I have made a mistake. It's a signal to ask myself, oh yeah, I did make a mistake. I need to keep working on that. But it's not a fact. I was raised that you need to stay busy, and so when I would relax, sometimes I would feel guilty because I would call myself lazy. So was it a mistake that I was relaxing? Well, no. I've learned over the years that it's really important to learn to take time to relax. And so even though sometimes I feel guilty, that doesn't mean I made a mistake. It's a habit to feel guilty when I relax. So then I relax anyway, right? So anger is the power to fight for our dignity. It's the energy to set boundaries, to say, don't treat me like that. Okay? But just because I'm feeling angry does not mean I'm being mistreated. So if you think about all the emotions as information and kind of as a signal, and then asking yourself, what are you trying to tell me? And then asking about what's happening a little bit. But remember that emotions are not facts, they're information. Another piece is remembering that emotions are something we have. Just like thoughts are something we have. They're not who we are. And so not labeling ourselves a specific emotion. If I say, I'm an anxious woman, there's not a lot of room there for other feelings. Oh, maybe I'm a person that sometimes gets anxious more than others, but sometimes I get excited, sometimes I get bored. I mean, there's room for other feelings there. So we don't want to label ourselves a specific emotion. We want to have the flexibility to have a variety of emotions. And so there's something that we have, they're not who we are. And we talked about this a little bit in the visualization, but you can actually notice and practice emotions that you want to feel more often. In our society, we're in the habit of sometimes maybe remembering a painful event throughout our day, and then at night thinking about that and re-triggering that painful emotion. Practicing that. Maybe it was only 10 minutes that I felt really uncomfortable, but then if I practice it, it feels like hours. And so the goal of being able to notice when we feel other emotions that we want to feel more often, and holding on to that a little bit longer. So whatever that emotion is, whether that's confidence. The thing with anxiety sometimes too is it's not the event as much as our perceived ability to handle the event that makes us anxious. And so if I work on being more confident, there's less room for the anxiety. So practicing things that make us feel confident, make us feel capable. maybe I feel anxious in this situation, but then I go make sure that that day I do something that also makes me feel competent and capable. And then the other goal of just being able to sit with some anxiety. No, not saying I should never be anxious. Being able to say, there you are. There's my anxiety. Okay. You don't get to control my behavior, but I notice you're there. So the nice thing about anxiety is that sometimes when we're pushing ourselves to do something out of our comfort zone, we get anxious. Isn't that great that you feel anxious sometimes? Because if you didn't, then maybe you're not really pushing yourself very hard to try new things, to grow. So feeling a little anxious is okay. Maybe even something worth celebrating sometimes. Now, on a little bit to behaviors. So the skill of being able to choose your behaviors, not just let the emotions choose, but it is a skill to create a little bit of space between impulse and action. So with most emotions, they make us want to do something, and creating a little bit of space so we can make an effective choice. Now, one of the ways to practice is just notice when you have an urge to do something, and pause for a minute and create some space. I have an urge to text my friend. You know, whatever that is, pause for a minute, create a little space, and make a choice. It is a way to try to practice so you can add some effective choices and not just react on your emotions. And then another piece with behavior too is sometimes people sit around waiting for their emotions to do their behaviors. But we can actually choose behaviors that trigger emotions. Now, if I waited to feel motivated to exercise, I'd never exercise. But about 20 minutes into exercise, I start feeling motivated. I exercise because it's consistent with the woman I want to be. So choosing behaviors, and those behaviors can sometimes trigger the emotions that you want. Don't wait to feel motivated to study or motivated to go to class. Go anyway. Maybe while you're there, curiosity can get triggered. Motivation can get triggered. So by focusing on the behaviors, sometimes the emotions that you want more in your life can get triggered. Another skill is to be able to take accountability. So accountability is to look at our behavior and take responsibility for our part in things. So being able to do that helps us see, okay, here's the behavior, here's the consequences. This is something that I can work on. So it's different than shame. So shame, if I take accountability and say, oh, I made a mistake, this is how I change it. Shame in a way is like saying I am a mistake. Bad girl, bad boy. You know, I am bad. Well, if I do that, then it's really hard to look at my behavior. You know, if I'm too busy beating myself up, then it's hard to say, this is what I did and this is how I can do it different next time. And so accountability can be really empowering because we can actually work on changing our behavior and develop more competence that we can affect in life in the way that we want. So, but we want to decrease the habit of shame. So don't call yourself names and say that you're bad. Focus on what did I do and why wasn't it effective and what do I want to do next time. Other roadblocks to accountability are minimize, denial, and blame. Okay, so an example of that would be if there was a chair here and I pushed it over. Minimize would be, oh, I barely touched it. You know, denial would be like, what chair? You know, blame would be, stupid chair got my way. You know, and so in life, some of us are in the habit of these three things, minimize, denial, and blame, and that gets in the way of us taking accountability for our behavior and then working on making our life better. And then the skill of choosing behaviors that are consistent with the person that we want to be. So whatever it is that you do, whatever that behavior is, there's going to be somebody that agrees with it and somebody that disagrees with it. Whatever it is. So you have to figure out what you value and what you believe in. And choose behaviors that are consistent with the person that you want to be. So putting it into that context. And sometimes I like to think of it in a way, if you imagine a mountain, and in your journey, you're kind of going around the mountain, and your ideal self is at the top of the mountain, and you need to notice when you're getting closer to your ideal self and when you're getting away from it with your behaviors. So I value being healthy, so if I maybe smoke, maybe that gets me away from my ideal self. And just having that compass, am I getting closer or am I getting farther away? You never get to your ideal self because that changes through this journey. If you think about it, what this looks like now is probably different than what it looked like 5 years ago. So with life experience, this changes. So not thinking you're just going to run up to the mountain and be your ideal self, but just having the ability to notice when you're doing things that get you closer and when you're doing things that get you away. And then working on getting yourself back on track. So these are a variety of skills and there's lots of different self-help books and workshops, and I think there's probably even podcasts or the little games or different things that from your iPod. I mean, there's different things that you can use to kind of work on some of these skills and find ways to practice. Thank you.